Have you ever shared a really big idea, something you were passionate about, only to have it, well, just fizzle out? We've all been there. Today, we're going to dive into the science behind crafting messages that don't just get heard, but actually stick around. Let's do this.
It's a pretty common feeling, right? You cram for something or you learn a new skill and a week later, poof, it's gone. But listen, this isn't some kind of personal failing. It's actually how our brains are wired. And that wiring is getting seriously tested in our modern world.
I mean, think about it. We are just bombarded with information every single day from every direction. So our brains have to be picky. They're constantly deciding what's worth keeping and what gets tossed. The real challenge for us then is to make sure our idea is one of the keepers. So how on earth do we do that? Well, here's the game plan. First, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of your brain's limitations. Then, we'll unpack 3 super important principles for making things memorable. We'll wrap all that up into a handy toolkit, and then we'll turn it over to you.
All right, first things first. If we want to design unforgettable messages, we got to understand the hardware we're working with, the human brain. And it really comes down to 2 very, very different systems for handling memory.
Okay, so imagine your working memory is like a tiny, kind of cluttered workbench. It's where you're juggling new information in real time. But here is the critical thing you have to know. It is incredibly small. It can only hold a few new things at once before it just gets completely overwhelmed and starts dropping stuff. And then, on the other hand, you've got your long-term memory. Now, this isn't a workbench. It's a massive, unbelievably organized warehouse. It has a practically unlimited capacity to store things it's already learned. Psychologists call these stored patterns schemas. Think of them like mental blueprints. So our job as communicators, it's to get our idea off that tiny temporary workbench and safely into that giant permanent warehouse. So you've got these 2 systems, right? The temporary workbench and the permanent warehouse. And the bridge between them, well, that bridge is managed by something called cognitive load, which is really just a fancy way of saying the total amount of mental horsepower you're using at any given moment. But here's the twist. Not all cognitive load is the same. There's intrinsic load. That's just how tough the subject is. Can't do much about that. Then there's germane load. That's the good stuff, the actual effort of building connections and learning. And then you have the villain of our story, extraneous load. This is all the wasted brain power your audience spends just trying to figure out your confusing slide or decode unnecessary jargon. Our first job is to hunt this down and destroy it.
And that brings us right to our first big principle: reduce needless work. The mission here is simple. We have to make it as easy as humanly possible for our audience's brain to get our point. That means being ruthless about cutting out junk that just makes them work harder than they need to. Let's put it this way. Every little bit of brain power your audience wastes on a confusing layout or a poorly worded sentence, that's energy they can't use for actually understanding your idea. We have to respect that their mental bandwidth is a finite resource.
Okay, check this out. This is a perfect example called the split attention effect. On the left, see how your brain has jumped back and forth? You look at the image, then you have to find the corresponding label in the list. It's a tiny bit of work, but it adds up. Now, look at the right. By simply putting the labels right on the image, we've killed that needless work. It's clearer, it's faster, and it's way easier to remember.
You know, another classic trap is the redundancy effect. This is what happens when you show people the exact same information in 2 ways at once. Think about someone who just reads their slides to you, word for word. Instead of helping, it actually forces your brain to do extra work, asking, wait, is this the same information? Which, you guessed it, just increases that bad extraneous load.
So, once we've cleared out all that clutter and made our message clean and simple, we can move on to principle number 2. Now we get to play offense and actively help the brain build those long-term connections. And the single best way to do that is by creating visual anchors.
Communicator Angel Reyes nails it with this quote: abstract ideas, they're like smoke. They're just hard to grab onto. But a visual metaphor, it's like an anchor. It connects your new strange idea to a shape or a system that the audience already gets. So how do you actually make one of these? Well, it's about a 6-step process. You start by boiling your idea down to its core function. Then you brainstorm everyday things that work in a similar way. Now, step 3 is crucial. You have to test it. Because trust me, a bad metaphor that just confuses people is so much worse than no metaphor at all. Once you find one that works, you design a simple visual, introduce it clearly, and keep tweaking it till it's perfect. And you can start with some common categories to get your brain going. You know, is your idea a system?
Maybe think about it like a building with a foundation. Is it a long process? Maybe it's a journey down a path. Or does it filter things? A funnel or a bridge might be the perfect fit. These simple images become incredibly powerful mental shortcuts for your audience.
Okay, so our message is crystal clear, and it's anchored with a great visual. But now we have to make sure people are actually paying attention in the first place. And this leads us to our third principle, using sensationalism carefully. This is a powerful tool, but you got to handle it with care. The key idea here is something called message sensation value, or MSV for short. Really, all it is a measure of a message's wow factor. It's the degree to which it grabs your senses, makes you feel something, and gets your adrenaline going.
So we're talking about things like really fast edits, cool visual effects, dramatic music, or a huge plot twist. All of these things crank the MSV way up. And they are fantastic at grabbing attention. But, and this is a really big but, there's a hidden danger.
This chart shows that danger perfectly. It's called the inverted U effect. See, with too little sensation, your message is just boring and gets ignored. But if you crank it up too high, it completely backfires. You trigger cognitive overload. The flashy special effects actually get in the way of your argument. The sweet spot is right there in the middle, engaging enough to get attention, but not so crazy that it's overwhelming. The big takeaway here is that the sizzles should serve the steak, not smother it. And research backs this up. One study found that for ads with really strong arguments, making them too sensational actually made them less effective. The flashiness just got in the way of the substance.
All right, let's pull all three of these principles together. Let's build a simple, powerful toolkit you can use anytime you need to make an idea unforgettable.
So here it is, your toolkit, 3 roles you need to play. First, be an editor. Your job is to minimize that bad cognitive load by cutting everything that isn't essential. Second, be an architect. Your job is to build understanding with strong, clear visual anchors. And third, be a conductor. Your job is to use sensation strategically to manage the audience's attention and keep them engaged, not overwhelmed. Look, these principles aren't just some abstract theory. They are real, practical tools you can start using today, right now. They're how you make sure your most important ideas don't just get heard, they get remembered. And even better, they get acted on. So the next time you're building a presentation or writing an important email or just trying to get a big idea across, think about this stuff. Think about that tiny workbench and that massive warehouse. The question isn't just, what do I want to say? The real question is, how will I design this message so that it simply cannot be forgotten?